Welcome to a new episode of For One of a Nail. This week you're joined by your host, Keaton.
And Chris.
Perfect. So, Chris, I know we did this in the first episode, but it's been a while. Do you want to just give a quick idea of your bona fides, historically speaking?
I have no qualifications.
Wonderful.
To do this podcast.
Very easy. Yeah. And so I think we'll just jump right into it then. So, what do you know of Alexander Bell?
Not a whole lot. I'm also really glad I successfully guessed what bona fides meant. I had heard it a couple times before, but never actually. So real glad that went off. And then of course I had to point it out. So, you know, but not a whole lot. I know he had to do with, he was like the inventor of the telephone. But other than that, nothing. Really had a good name to be the inventor of the telephone. I've always thought that.
Yeah. It's kind of like that old idea of people getting a job based off their names. Like if your last name is Baker, you're going to become a baker.
I mean, that's like the aim. Like no one does that nowadays.
Of course. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's fair. Well, there's quite a few, now that I think about it, there's quite a few like movies and stuff where the butler's name is Butler.
They
like their last name, like they have another first name like Jeeves, but then there's always a joke of like, oh yes, my family name is Butler and I come from a long line of butlers. We've all buttled for centuries.
I mean, I guess stick with what you know. How do butlers have time to have children?
Butlers are people, man.
Right, but don't butlers normally live in the house of like their boss and they have to wait on their boss night and day?
It's more of an old school idea. Generally, the butler was actually the head of the household. It was basically the head male servant was the butler. And they actually were in charge of the cellar, but also the management and the running of the house. And so in a large estate, a butler would be one of up to 100 servants that would be able to find their own time to grow and raise a family. At the end of the day, it was a job as much as anything else. And they still exist. But
wild.
Yeah. The whole idea of getting a job based off of your name is called nominative determinism.
Of course you know of course you know the term.
I proposed it as a Worldwide Workshop episode before, where that's...
yes.
Yes. I had to look back at my notes as to what that was called, but yes, that's how I had it at hand. But Alexander Bell was born on March 2nd, 1847 in Edinburgh, Scotland. One of my favorite cities in the world. If you ever get a chance to go to Scotland, you got to go to Edinburgh. It's beautiful. He was the middle of three boys, and his father was a professor of phonetics, which is a branch of linguistics that studies how humans produce and perceive sounds. So basically from a very young age, he was already growing up in the idea of like communication, linguistics, that whole world. But he was also born Alexander Bell, not Alexander Graham Bell, and that's because he had no middle name, like his brothers, and begged his father for one. So both of his brothers had middle names, but he didn't. And so he begged so much that his father finally allowed him to take the middle name Graham as his 11th birthday present.
After the cracker, of course.
Well, in a way, yes, because it was after a close Canadian family friend. So it was after a cracker.
Oh, no. Keaton.
Okay. No, we like Canada. Canada's fine. As a boy, Alec, as he was known, not Alex, was fascinated with nature and showed proclivities for art, poetry, music, and invention. So he was a right shit of a child that no one liked. He became the family's pianist without any formal training.
Impressive.
He and a friend invented a simple dehusking machine that was put into a neighbor's mill and operated for many years. He was 12 years old at the time. I think when I was 12, I was mostly concerned about not sticking a crayon up my nose because I saw that episode of The Simpsons where Homer does that and it makes him dumb.
Oh, so wait. Who just lets a 12-year-old just build a machine for their farm? Like, granted, he was clearly qualified, but how did he get there? How did he get to the point?
I have to imagine that he built it and then presented it to them working, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you can stick that on the machine if you want. We'll just if anything breaks, we'll charge your father because you must be loaded." I can't imagine they were like, "You know what? Who should we get to make our dehusking machine? You know what? Alec, who lives next door and is 12 years old.
That one who just got that cool new middle name.
Oh yeah, Alec Graham Bell. Now that's a lot of fun. What'd you get for your 11th birthday? What's like the main present?
I don't know. What grade was 11th grade? Or
11th grade
11 years old.
Okay, so if it's 4 years back from the 5th grade, between elementary and middle school.
What house did I live in 5th grade? 5th grade, I lived in the first Whitestone house. I literally have no clue. Probably some dumb toys from Toys R Us, to be honest.
I got a really cool bike. I remember that. But imagine getting a name. That's crazy.
Listen, that boy knew what he wanted.
That's fair. And it was the 1800s. Like, it was either that or a nasty case of TB. So, Alec was also a huge fan of ventriloquism, and I feel like that's actually a surprisingly common thing of young kids going through like a ventriloquist stage. Like I have a half brother who's gone through a ventriloquist stage, and it's unnerving. But you want to help. You want to be encouraging because they're passionate about it. But it's also like you're not going to have friends if you keep this up.
Yeah, I don't know anyone who's gone through a ventriloquist phase.
I feel like I've heard people make reference to it, and I'm beginning to think it's not as weird a thing as I assumed my brother was.
Listen, I will take your word for it. I have 4 siblings. Not a single one of them, to my knowledge, went through a ventriloquist phase.
Who knows? Maybe they did secretly, and now you have a chance to bond with your family because of this podcast.
Oh, I'll have to go investigating.
Yes. But also at age 12, Alec's mother began to lose her hearing. Alec very quickly developed a rudimentary tapping language so that the two of them could communicate. And he found that she could hear him if he spoke in clear, modulated tones into her forehead.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So the tapping thing makes sense. That's basically just Morse code. That's the telegraph. That makes sense. The whole idea, like, how do you discover that you can get her to hear you if you just shout into her forehead?
Lots of trial and error.
Did they like try other like parts of the head first? Like, did he like shout into her mouth thinking that's how the sound got?
Tried the armpit first. Left toe didn't work.
That'd be great.
Forehead was the only next logical step.
Yeah. But you can see at an early age he's beginning to have this interest in acoustics, though.
Mm.
And this came naturally because his father, grandfather, and uncle were all elocutionists. His father even wrote a book called The Standard Elocutionist, and it was an international bestseller. He used Alec for public demonstrations because Alec could read the visible speech language alphabet. Like, you know that when you go on Wikipedia, like, and they have the word, and then they have that like at the beginning of the article, and then they have that string of hieroglyphics that's supposed to tell you how it's pronounced. Alexander Graham Bell could just read that, which is just weird. And so he was obviously a very bright kid, but he was also a terrible student in that classic way of like, if you read about geniuses enough, like that's just a recurring theme. Like, they're all terrible students, but very bright.
They're all dicks.
Yeah, they're all dicks. Well, the thing is that also comes up all the time if you read about the lives of serial killers. Like, all the time they're described as, oh yeah, he was very bright, but extremely lazy, or had no drive. And it's like, oh, and then he murdered 48 people, or he developed a new way of looking at the light waves, or something like that. It's like, those are the two paths for people who are bright but lazy.
It's a dangerous path. You either go to one extreme or the other.
Yeah. If I ever see a kid looking particularly precocious, but also like he doesn't want to spend time memorizing his times tables, I'm just gonna kick him. Just because I know only bad things will come out of that. We're either gonna get a nuclear bomb or 13 found slaughtered.
I mean, neither of those are good.
Yeah, see, exactly. Alec would often skip class and did not pay attention to any subject that wasn't in an area of study he was interested in. So like if it was history, he just wouldn't care and he just wouldn't pay attention in class.
I mean, that's a move,
Which,
though.
yeah, that's my thing. Is like I agree. Like I definitely had that mindset when I was a 13-year-old kid, but I still did the work because I didn't want to not get a good grade.
Yeah, same. I was always terrified about getting bad grades. There are plenty of subjects I just straight up could not care less about, though.
Like what? History?
I mean, it was mainly in high school. In like elementary school, it's basically everything is fine. Middle school, generally okay, but in high school, I hated U.S. history.
Yeah.
I surprisingly like killed the Regents exam, but like got like a 2 on the AP exam. I was an A push.
I got a 5 on the AP US History exam, which is my only 5 I got in. Well, no, that's not true. AP Euro, I also got a 5.
Yeah, unsurprising. Not global?
Yeah. They didn't. My school didn't offer global.
Mm.
If you took global, it was the honors class was global.
Oh, gotcha.
My school was weird. It required 4 APs to graduate.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well, to graduate with their diploma, if you met all the requirements, you still graduated from high school in the state of South Carolina. But you had to graduate from that school. You had to take 4 APs. I took 6.
I think I took 5. Wow. I can't remember, though. High school is so long ago.
My school only offered 1 non-honors course. Everything else was honors or AP.
Jesus.
It was weird. It was a weird system. I really liked high school. I had a great time. Had a bunch of good friends. Back on it with just absolute amounts of shame. But it was my school was very good. I can't lie. I had a very good school. But
yeah, you went to like a bougie school, no?
No, it was a charter school. It was a public school, but you had to take a test and qualify to get in.
Yeah, if that's the extra barrier to entry, it's bougie already.
No. It was filled with rich white kids, like to the brim.
Yeah.
We were constantly getting in trouble for not like having enough people of color in there. And it was like my school never did fundraisers because all of the parents were so excited they didn't have to pay $45,000 to send their kids to school at some private school that they would just give it all to my school. So like we never had to do any of that, which was great. Honestly, I hated fundraisers.
Yeah, I always had to do fundraisers for like marching band or the play.
The plague.
Not the plague.
How does it feel to see all your fundraising finally pay off?
Not. I'll fundraise research against the plague, not to create a new one. Please do not blame me for 2020.
I'm going to cut that so it sounds like you're saying I fundraised for the plague. Despite all of his failings as a student, Alexander got a job teaching elocution and music at the age of 16 at an academy in Scotland while he was there as a student. So I think basically he was TAing, but he was technically a member of faculty while also taking classes.
That should be illegal.
This was the 1800s? Didn't matter.
That's a level of power no student should have.
The literacy rate was about 2%. And so it was really advantageous to have anybody who wanted to teaching because they were probably one of the few people qualified to do it.
That's fair.
Also, I don't think he was teaching himself. Like, I think he was taking other classes at the school while teaching elocution and music. But
I mean, when your father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, you said, all did that.
Uncle.
And you grew up around that. Checks out that you'll be able to teach it.
Yeah. Though, both my grandfathers and both of my parents' older brothers are doctors. I could not perform an open heart surgery, despite my grandfather having performed the first open heart surgery in the history of North Carolina. Hey everyone, misspoke here a bit. My grandfather was a member of the surgical team that performed the first heart transplant in North Carolina. He was actually working under Dr. Robichik, who was the first man to perform open heart surgery in the state. Got a little confused. Didn't want to toot my own horn, just wanted to make sure Dr. Robichik was properly recognized. Yeah, I think he would be uniquely qualified, but also no. That's just not how that works. You don't get to just do that. But Then again, elocution is not the same as surgery, I understand.
Yes.
But he continued with his combined interests in acoustics and invention, and invented a doll's head that could say the word mama.
Disgusting.
Exactly, yeah. And he also discovered that he could train the family dog to growl continuously and then manually move the dog's lips and vocal cords to make it speak.
Move the dog's vocal cords?
Yeah. I think it's just like massaging the throat.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise he stuck his finger into the thing's mouth and like plucked individual cords, and I don't think that's how that works.
Mm-mm. That's wild. Wait, how did he make the doll speak? Did he just like it was like a specific like air passage way?
Yeah, I think he probably the same way where he made like basically a reed that was able to make like the ah sound, and then he just made a set of fake lips that could go mama. So that's just a continuous sound, but you covering it per part, it makes mama.
Gross. I hate it.
Yeah, no, it's awful. But that nowadays you would be called a psychopath and like put in an asylum or something. But back then you were the smartest boy in all of Scotland.
I mean, we have much more intricate talking dolls nowadays.
Yeah, it wouldn't be all that interesting.
Yeah.
Honestly, that is one of the most disturbing things that I could imagine if like my kid came to me and was like, hey, I found out something cool I can do with the dog. I'm like, oh, this is not going to end well. There's no way. There's no series of words that you could follow that with that's going to be okay. Between 1865 and 1870, all three of the Bell sons became ill. So him and both of his brothers. Alec, because he was overworked. He was focusing very heavily on his studies and his inventions at this time. And the other two because of tuberculosis. And both of them died.
Oh, no.
So after their deaths, Alec's parents, fearing for their remaining son's health, decided to move to Canada, which is honestly not a bad idea. I mean, Scotland isn't the healthiest place in the world.
Right.
Yeah. He was 23 years old. They also brought Alec's newly widowed sister-in-law with them to work as like a maid, I guess. I guess they kind of just took like ownership of her. Not really, like not ownership, obviously, but like they're like, our son died, but you get to come along as well. Which I guess is kind. It's just kind of weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they moved into a pretty large house in Canada, and Bell set up a workshop in the carriage house and continued experimenting. While there, he became interested in the tribes at the nearby Six Nations Reserve and learned the Mohawk language. And he translated their unwritten language into visible speech using those pronunciation guides, and was made an honorary chief for the accomplishment. And in the ceremony, he put on a traditional headdress and danced traditional dances. So
interesting.
Yeah, kind of a weird tidbit about him, but yeah, he's a strange guy. We'll get into it later, but he's surprisingly progressive in some ways. I don't know if this would still qualify as progressive, but I mean, he definitely took an interest in the local First Nations tribes.
I mean, in any way where this white man just comes in to see what knowledge he could take from them.
I'm sure it was extremely patronizing. Yeah. I'm sure that it was like, I'm sure there was a bunch of letters about the white man's burden being written, but I didn't see any of that, and so I can't say for sure whether or not it happened. But no one from this time period today would sound like a good person. He moved to Boston and opened the School of Vocal Physiology and Mechanics of Speech. While there, he quickly made a name for himself amongst the basically amongst the community of people who needed elocution lessons and for people who were deaf. He even one of his students at the school was a young Helen Keller.
Oh,
yeah. He viewed deafness as something that needed to be eradicated and was against the usage of sign language, basically saying that it was something that would other deaf people from the rest of society. And so they needed to focus on reading lips and perfecting their own elocution in order to be able to fit in better. This means that some members of the modern deaf community absolutely hate him.
Yeah, no, very fair.
Yeah. But it's actually mostly for viewing deafness as something that needs to be eradicated. It's not for the opposition to sign language, though that is part of it. In 1874, he was sharing a laboratory with an Italian immigrant named Antonio Meucci, and Antonio developed a rudimentary telephone and sent it to Western Union. I think his used water as the medium in it to transmit sounds. But Western Union was unimpressed and then lost the materials that he had sent them. By all accounts, this wasn't really working all that well. Like, it was very hard to hear anything coming through it, and the length in which, he had only sent like a few feet of wire, and so it didn't really seem like it would be able to travel all that far. But Bell was working along the same lines, and in 1875, the next year, he drew up a patent application for a very similar device. And on February 14th, 1875, Elijah Gray submitted a caveat with the U.S. Patent Office for a telephone design that used a water transmitter. So he had a better version of what Antonio had been making. A caveat is basically like, I'm not a patent lawyer, but a caveat is essentially like something you can file with the patent office that's like, I'm working on this, I'm very close to finish, but I don't have it done yet. Here's my root, like, this is a placeholder for a future patent, essentially.
Gotcha.
I believe, I could be wrong. Bell submitted a patent application for an extremely similar device on the same day. He actually submitted the full application. He was awarded patent number 174,465 on March 7th, 1876, so a year later, for a device that could transmit vocal or other sounds telegraphically by causing electrical undulations similar in form to the vibrations of the air accompanying the said vocal or other sound.
Beautiful.
Yes, exactly.
That's a telephone.
Don't you just love patent language? It's Shakespeare. The next day, after dropping off his patent application, Bell drew a diagram in his notebook that was strikingly similar to the caveat that Elijah Gray had filed. And 3 days after issuing the patent, Bell was able to get the machine working. So he filed the patent with like the idea of like, this is what the eventual thing's going to be, and then I'll make it. It turned in the application before it was completely finished. He famously asked for his assistant in the other room to come in and help him. Basically saying, Mr. So-and-so, I need you right now. I need you here. And like the other guy came in, and that's when they realized the machine was working. And the patent examiner that gave Bell the patent was a drunkard that owed significant debts to Bell's lawyer. And would later claim that Bell paid him $100 to see Gray's technical specs, which is a crime. Modern historians debate whether or not this was true. He might have just been going after money from Bell. He might have just been going after money. And so no one knows for sure if this is accurate. It's kind of a conspiracy. But what is undeniable is that Bell was the first one to get a working model going, even if he did have help by looking at Elijah Gray's material.
God, imagine what the world would be like if all our phones, at least initially, were just tubes of water. I'm assuming it would not have worked to scale, just because he only sent a couple feet of wire.
I just think it would have eventually changed. Like, eventually someone would have figured out, like, hey, no, this is dumb. Let's not use water. But I think Bell was certainly the first one to do it with air as the medium. Or at least the diaphragm. Yes, but I mean, like, the water it wasn't like a pneumatic system. That's not what the telephone was working with. It was still based off of electricity, but it was basically the idea of a diaphragm was important. I think. I could be wrong. I tried to read the patent. It's dumb.
So we have speakers at this time then.
Ooh.
Because you would need speakers for a telephone, right? And then isn't the whole basic theory behind a microphone is it's just like the same grill, or not grill, the same what would you call it, the thing that moves,
diaphragm,
the diaphragm as a speaker that just in
Yeah,
reverse?
I don't. I'm not sure. If whether or not, because without a telephone, there would be no reason to have a speaker unless pre-recorded audio already existed, right? And so
Hmm.
I genuinely think this might have also been the invention of the speaker in that way.
But
I could be wrong, but I just feel like Edison's what was it called?
sternograph?
No, sternograph.
Isn't the sternograph the wax cylinder that plays sound with the needle?
Is it the sternograph? I always thought it was something different.
Sonograph? Sternograph is is a stenographer is the
Yeah. But yeah, it's fine. But yeah, I know that was invented around this time. Like these are definitely very close together, but this might have been first. I could be talking out my ass though. But Bell continued in refining his invention and started showing it off to the in public. Early on, his investors offered to sell the patent to Western Union for $100,000, but the president of Western Union balked at the price, calling the thing a toy. Later, he would remark that if he could have had it for $25 million, he would have considered it a bargain because it single-handedly killed the telegraph.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and now Western Union is just used for sending money.
Actually, so if we had a telegraph, the telegraph needs a speaker. I guess not really. You could just have a little vibration buzzer, but it made a tone. What made the tone on the telegraph?
Oh no, that's actually a modern creation of movies to have something going through. The original telegraphs just had a clicking sound.
Oh.
Yeah, or like at the very least they had like a solid tone. It wasn't like it was just basically the sound of electricity. Like it would complete a circuit and then it was just enough voltage going through that it made a sound.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. But Bell demonstrated the telephone at the 1876 Centennial Exposition, and I believe that one was in Paris, but I could be wrong. No, it wasn't. And then, and in 1878, he did a private demonstration for Queen Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
She was so impressed by the machine that she asked to purchase the telephones used in the demonstration, but Bell offered to make her a special set instead. And I think we still have it. It's made of like marble and ivory, and it's very beautiful.
Ooh.
This is still at a time when like 3 people owned a telephone, so it wouldn't have been much use. He founded Bell Telephone in 1877, and by 1886, more than 150,000 people in the U.S. owned a telephone.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Really boomed.
Yeah. One of their the first person to buy stock in the company was Emperor Pedro II of Brazil. Which is just weird, I think.
Like
Dom
U.S.
Pedro.
stock, or did stock work? Like
stock was still international at the time because you bought stock with the company. Yes, there was the stock exchanges, but also you could just go to the company's office, assuming it was a small enough operation, and just buy stock there. And so he probably bought it at like the expositions, or like he knew, like he'd made contact with Bell and was like, "I want to be your first investor" or something like that.
Gotcha.
Part of the company's existence would be fighting the many legal battles that erupted over Bell's patents. Bell would win all the court cases that came out of these dispute over patents, though one brought by Meucci might have succeeded had he not died right before the Supreme Court heard the case. I think he died like a week before opening arguments.
Died of what?
I don't know. I mean, it's the 1800s. He probably died of any number of things, but he was not murdered, if that's what you're getting at. He was a fairly old man by this time. This was the one that was most likely to succeed, but with his death, Bell kind of had beaten off all his attackers, and so he now sort of stood unopposed as the inventor of the telephone, especially in the common eyes, where everyone just saw him as the guy who invented it. On July 11th, 1877, Bell married one of his former students, Mabel Hubbard. They would have 2 children that survived to adulthood. They were Elsie, who would go on to marry the first editor of National Geographic, and Marion, who married noted botanist David Fairchild. Yeah.
Did they also? Did they do anything with inventions or?
No, not that I've seen. I think in that way that for all of the tribute to Alexander Bell's progressiveness that I was giving earlier, he probably had the same ideas of women that Victorian people did just generally. And so I doubt his daughters were seen as viable scientific material later in life.
Yeah, I was going to say the only information we had about them is, yeah, they married these 2 kind of important people.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting enough, but his wife was deaf, so she had been one of his students in deafness. He'd actually been good friends with her family when she was a student.
Marry your students. Come on, dude.
It was well after she had graduated. Like the school had not been operating for some time at this point. Bell would remain active in inventing and science for the rest of his life. He took up an interest in heredity and genetics and conducted experiments on his estate on rams and ewes with the intent of producing a sheep with multiple nipples that would bear twins.
Why was that the... Okay. Don't know how those are necessarily correlated.
I think it was a bunch of experiments happening at once where he wanted to check out genetic modification, the ability to increase reproduction, and also just had a shit ton of sheep he needed to do something with. He also wrote a paper called Upon the Formation of a Deaf Variety of the Human Race, which noted the increased number of deaf children born to those with deafness in the family, basically saying that deafness might be a genetic thing. This really got him popular with eugenicists, and they would repeatedly seek him out afterwards, but to his credit, he always opposed any legislation that would limit the rights of the deaf or involve sterilization. So, by all accounts, he might have agreed with the central thrust of the eugenics, but he definitely was opposed to any idea of limiting the rights of existing deaf people. Which is kind of interesting for him. I got to give him props for that. There's too many stories of people from this time period who get wrapped up in eugenics, and then you find out that they started a foundation to try to sterilize half the country because they weren't pale enough. And so for him to do the opposite is actually pretty good. He died of complications from diabetes on August 2nd, 1922 at the age of 75.
Rip.
Yeah. At the end of his funeral, every phone in North America was silenced out of respect.
I hope emergency lines were excluded.
Well, to be fair, at this time, there wasn't really an idea of 911. That's also a fairly modern thing. You still kind of went out, you could use a payphone to call up the police, but they also weren't silenced for very long. I think it was 1 minute, but...
Listen, 1 minute can mean the difference between life and death.
Truth. But enough about him, because you ever heard of Francisco Tárrega?
No.
I would do the rolling R's thing, but I can't because I am a filthy white man. And so can you do that?
Not particularly.
That's fair. He was born on November 21st, 1852 in Villarreal in Spain. His father was a flamenco guitarist and served as a watchman at a nearby convent, which sounds like the setup to a joke, right? We got the local musician to watch over the convent to make sure nothing bad happened to the nuns. It sounds like a more complex version of the fox guarding the hen house. As a child, Francisco ran away from his nanny one day while out and fell into an irrigation channel and injured his eyes.
Oh no.
When his father found out, he immediately moved the family to Castellón de la Plana so Francisco could receive music lessons.
Wow.
Basically, he wanted his son to have a career even if he was blind. And the only one he knew of was music.
Oh, he was fully blind.
if he went blind. I don't believe he ever went fully blind, but it was a real concern at the time, and he definitely had problems with the eyesight throughout the rest of his life.
Gotcha.
In 1862, a concert guitarist heard Francisco play and convinced his father to allow the boy to come study under him in Barcelona. Tárrega, who was 10 when he left for Barcelona, ran away 3 times. He has a habit. Each time his father had to find him and return him to Barcelona.
He fully left the city?
Yeah, he just fully just fucked off.
This is a freaking bold 10-year-old.
Yeah. In the winter of 1880, Tárrega covered a gig for a friend. And after the performance, he was approached by an important man from town who asked him to teach his daughter, Maria Jose Rizo. I apologize to everyone from the nation of Spain. And the two were soon engaged.
Wow.
So we have a running theme of teachers marrying their students, which is gross, I'll admit.
This is the true theme of the episode.
He soon became renowned for his abilities on guitar and made a living composing and performing across Europe. He was basically the most prominent classical guitarist in Europe at the time. And he is here's an example of some of his work. Very good, very, very classic style, classical guitar sound.
Gotcha. This is DRM free?
It is. I got it from Wikipedia. He makes up a big name for himself. Honestly, he produces a lot of work and is instrumental, and a lot of his stuff is written down and creates his own style of classical guitar playing. But he had a pretty one-track kind of life and died in Barcelona in 1906 at the age of 57. He is remembered today as the father of classical guitar.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're going to jump ahead again. And so for the vast majority of the telephone's history, to alert the owner to an incoming call, the phone would ring an actual metal bell inside the body of the phone. Everyone's heard it. That's that classic. It's the alarm clock sound. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But as phones got cheaper and transitioned to living on the wall instead of on a table and got smaller and more plastic, the metal bell was taken out and the sound of a bell was reproduced electronically. When cell phones came along, they mostly copied the design and characteristics of landlines because that's the language everyone already knew how to speak. Even down to the ringing sound they would play. But one company decided to buck this trend. And that company was Nokia. Nokia selected a musical phrase from a composition for solo guitar called Gran Vals by Francisco Tárrega, which was this piece.
I've definitely heard this.
You've definitely heard this. Right here. They added an extra note on the end. I didn't cut it off too early. It really does just go that long. And that became the Nokia ringtone. It was called the Nokia tune and was first used on the Nokia 2110 that released in 1994.
Wow. I did not know we've had cell phones since 1994.
Earlier. Oh, yeah, before 1994. Yeah. I think late 80s is when you get those suitcase cell phones where it's in a whole thing. Did you ever have a Nokia?
No. The first phone I ever had was... I don't even remember the brand. It was my sister's old phone. Mm-hmm. And then my aunt and uncle had promised that they were going to get me a phone. So they also around that time had given me a prepaid phone. So then I had 2 phones for a minute.
Nice. I was going to say my grandfather loved Nokias. He had a very specific model of Nokia that he just thought was the bee's knees and would continue ordering them up until 2010.
Jesus.
Yeah, he really liked them. But
my brother-in-law tried to not use smartphones a couple years ago. He just got rid of his iPhone and bought a dumb phone and did eventually return to the smartphone life because there's just so much convenience in them.
Yeah, there's no reason not to.
I like the aspect of potentially being disconnected for a while, but I need Google Maps. I'm stranded otherwise.
I just need music. Like, honestly, I could give up the maps function largely if I just had access to, like, Spotify.
That and podcasts for me.
Nah. Hey. I've been listening to a lot of my podcasts through Spotify now, so.
See, I refuse.
Really?
Spotify is trying to move it, and I know we're also on Spotify, so maybe I shouldn't be trash talking Spotify, but Spotify is trying to push too hard into the podcast industry, and they're trying to an extent to monopolize it by like buying out shows and making them exclusively on their platform, and I dislike that.
That's fair, and I agree. That's fine. You know what? I'm gonna give this to the audience. Everyone listening, I want you to go out and listen to this episode as many times as you can on your platform of choice. And whatever platform has the most listens will know that wins. And that's the good, morally correct way to listen to podcasts.
We'll have to give it like 3 years to get enough data.
Not if they just keep it on loop. Like, just have like set up a little robot to like wiggle your mouse every few minutes. That way it doesn't think you're idle. But just loop this episode over and over again. So we'll know.
I guess I've exclusively listened to the Worldwide Workshop on Spotify.
There you go. I have a few other things that are like I use on my iPad, I use something called Overcast, which is just a different front end on Apple Podcasts. But
is it the same? Like, are we on Overcast?
Yep, because it's just Apple Podcasts. So if you're on Apple Podcasts, you're on Overcast. Just another app.
We're in a couple. Like, I think we're on Stitcher. Because I know people really like Stitcher. And we're on like one other random one that someone said they use. So I'm like, sure, I'll give them our RSS feed too. We'll be in more places. That's fine.
But, so the Nokia tune very quickly took off and became a common point of reference for cell phones as they became more and more frequent part of our lives. Basically, this is right as everyone's beginning to get a cell phone, and Nokia was the most popular brand, especially in Europe and the United States. And so this tone was listened to an estimated 1.8 billion times per day in 2009, which is about 200,000 times per second.
That's insane.
Yeah. Making it probably one of the most listened to pieces of music in the world.
I mean, think about like the Apple ringtones now, like the default ones.
Yeah, but even those, like, I think because it was the idea of having your phone on silent wasn't as common back then. So I think, like, when was the last time you actually heard somebody's ringtone?
Phew, that's a good question.
Yeah. People have things on silent now. But though we haven't quite gotten to that point, because we need to go back, we need to jump ahead a little bit from 1994 to 1997, when a 17-year-old Gothenburg student, Daniel Malmedal, recorded himself imitating the noises produced by a 2-stroke engine. Those noises were
Ding 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 bing bing dom dom bum ba dom bam bum ba dom bom bom ba ba bum bum bom bom bom.
Do you recognize that?
No.
Interesting. It will be important later.
Wait, is that the?
No.
Did they make a? Oh God. Is it like the but a ding 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 ding? Is it that song?
No. It's not. That.
Okay.
The video was featured on television shows and radio stations across Sweden, where he lived. So he became like a minor viral sensation right at the beginning of the internet in Sweden. Like, this is way pre-YouTube. In 2003, Eric Vernquist heard Malmedal's imitation and was compelled to create a character he believed would create such a sound. He dubbed his creation The Annoying Thing. Yeah, I think. In 2000, the company Jamba was founded in Berlin. They wanted to capitalize on the emerging cell phone market, and it was one of the first companies to market customized ringtones in Europe and the United States. This was a practice that was already really popular in Japan. There were a bunch of companies that would allow you to make your own ringtones, and then you could share them with friends, and like people could recognize you based off of your ringtone. Which is one of the first places it started up. But Jamba is the company that really brought this to the Anglosphere. Apparently, this might be an apocryphal story. I haven't been able to like source this, but I've heard it repeated. Apparently, its founder was woken from a particularly nasty hangover by a friend's Nokia ringtone and was really annoyed by the sound, thinking that it should have been like it would have been much more soothing had it been a song, like an actual song you could sing. So they learned the moderately viral Swedish animation made by Vernquist and bought the rights to it. They renamed the character Crazy Frog. And they made a music video around a remix of the 80s song Axel F from the Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack.
Okay.
And that's because they took that original clip of Malmadal and they sped it up, and that got us this sound.
Ding 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 dum dum bum bum bam bum 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 bum.
So that's the annoying thing. That was then taken and remixed into a song, and that was bought by Jamba to make into a ringtone.
Are you gonna play the song?
No, I can't play the song. That's heavily copyrighted. No.
Okay, what is that character model? Why does it have a little penis?
Oh, that's the original thing. The annoying thing had a penis originally. Because the annoying thing wasn't meant to be marketable. The annoying thing was just meant to be like the creation of a bored computer animator.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. One of the first things Jamba did when they bought the rights to him is they chopped his dick off.
Good.
Apparently, Vernquist was not happy that they renamed him Crazy Frog. He was really annoyed at the idea that this was a frog. And decided not, and was just hated it.
I mean, it looks pretty froggish.
It's really froggy, that's for sure. So yeah, Jamba learned of the Crazy Frog's first album, Crazy Hits, was released on July 25th, 2005. It went to number 1 in Canada and New Zealand, and number 4 in France and Switzerland. It hit number 5 in the UK and 19 in the United States, proving once and forever the United States has better taste in music than Europe. It did go platinum internationally, though, and 3 singles came off of the album. You have, of course, Axel F., the original Crazy Frog song. Popcorn, which I looked up when I was putting together the notes for this. It's like, A, none of these songs are good. And B, I have no memory of this one. So maybe I was just too young for it. Like, this might have been just before my time, but I have no memory of these songs. And then there was the third. Can you guess the third single? I'm genuinely curious what your guesses are.
It's not the Gummy Bear song.
No.
I remember that being huge.
Same company.
I thought so.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember my middle school graduation. We are at Queens College, and I remember someone playing that song on loop on the bus, and I was so annoyed.
I would be too.
I have no clue.
The third single was a mashup of Jingle Bells and You Can't Touch This.
What?
Look it up at your own risk.
Oh, God.
Some other tracks on the album were Whoop, There It Is, Pump Up the Jam, Get Ready for This, the theme song from the television show Dallas, a song called Who Let the Frog Out, which can only imagine is Who Let the Dogs Out, I Like to Move It, the Pink
Classic.
Panther theme,
Classic.
and YMCA.
Classic, but I could do without that one.
Like, on their own, I would actually I would probably own, like, if I lived at the time, I'd probably own this CD. If it weren't these really annoying Crazy Frog remixes of all the songs.
I hated all the Alvin and the Chipmunks remixes of songs too.
It's just unconscionable.
Yeah.
Despite all the success financially, it is currently rated number 6 on Rate Your Music's bottom albums of all time. So
why?
Well, I mean, you got to think about the number of people who have the time to go out and make an account with rateyourmusic.com and then rate an album. They're not going to be Crazy Frog fans. Jamba! Drew most of its money from renting of songs and sounds to people as ringtones. These were advertised through TV commercials that urged people to text a number, and then they would send you the ringtone through text, and you could add it to your phone that way. But what wasn't quite clear is that you weren't buying the ringtone for like 99 cents. You were renting the ringtone. So as long as you had it on your phone, and until you asked them to stop, then you were paying them monthly out of your phone bill.
How could they tell if you still? They just texted you a file.
Yeah, I mean, just the way the phones were back then. Yeah, pretty much.
So how could they tell if you were still using it or not?
They didn't care. As long as you hadn't told them to stop, then you would still, they would keep charging you.
Crazy.
Yeah. They came under fire for how difficult it was to unsubscribe from their service and the underhanded methods they used to get customers to buy even more ringtones after their first. So if you bought a ringtone, you would get that, and then you would be offered more. And it was kind of worded in a way so that it looked like it meant that, oh, you also get to pick from these as well. But no, you were actually buying more ringtones when you did that. Yeah. They were also attacked for their extensive advertising to children, which is fair. Yeah, that's why they had to chop the dick off. They really got in hot water in 2006 when Jamba ! Created some ringtones around a parody of Hitler called Der Bunker for a German-based company that's not generally okay. So several television channels refused to air commercials for the ringtone, and a few like Holocaust survivor memorial groups like stage public shows of protest.
Yeah, very fair.
Yes. And so this is sort of like the nadir of Jamba, because on January of 2007, just a couple months after the Der Bonker scandal, the iPhone was released, the original incarnation of the iPhone, which kicked off the smartphone revolution. And so all of a sudden you had people with apps on their phone that allow them to chop up songs and use those as ringtones. Or even now the phone is itself a music player, and you can use just some of the songs you have downloaded. Jamba no longer could get people to text in to get cell phone ringtones anymore.
Rip Jamba.
Yeah. They had been bought by News Corp in late 2006 to make content around Fox television shows. This is like right before the release of the iPhone. And of course, obviously the release of the iPhone wasn't an overnight change. Like they still had a good 2-3 years of absolute market dominance before the smartphones took over. But since then, it has passed around to multiple different owners and names. It still exists. I can't remember what its current name is, but essentially they just make digital media for whoever owns them that week. Yeah. So there you go. That's how Alexander Graham Bell gave us Crazy Frog.
Damn you, Alexander Graham Bell.
I'll admit this one was it wasn't as many jumps, but I just wanted to talk about all these things independently.
Listen, I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Do you have a sign-off you want to give? Or anything you would like to say at the end here?
Hey, listen to the Worldwide Workshop. It's a good podcast.
Wow, coming in here plugging your pluggables, but it's not even this podcast. You know what? Listen, for every time you listen to the Worldwide Workshop, listen to this podcast twice.
This episode. Get those metrics up.
I honestly don't care which episode. It could be any of them. But just do for every Worldwide Workshop listen.
You can only listen to history so many times, Keaton.
That's not true. I do have episodes of other podcasts I've listened to multiple times that are about history. Like, honestly, Hardcore History, Dan Carlin, I know he gets flack for not being entirely accurate sometimes, but his Blueprint of Armageddon series is amazing. His series about the Khans is great. The King of Kings about the Persian Empire, astounding. Ghost of the Ostfront, oh my god, so good.
Listen, start a partnership. Reach out.
No, he releases like one episode a year. Like that man, he's also very successful.
We're not allowed to talk to successful people.
I just don't think he'd want to talk to us.
Very fair.
Who is this child that is coming at me? So yeah, how do you want to sign off?
Uh,
That's a pretty weird sign off, but if you want to go for the whole Toolman Tim Allen kind of
no, God, no, never. That man cannot. Boodle-a-doo.
thing. Boodle-doo.